Good evening. I'm calling the Monday, July 28th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting to order. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. All right, first item on the agenda tonight is the approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have any requests for changes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I approve the agenda for this evening.
Second.
All right, motion and second. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
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 Agenda is approved. Moving on, approval of minutes from the meeting held on Monday, July 8th, 2019. Do you have any requests for changes or concerns?
So moved.
All right. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second on approving the minutes?
Second.
Second. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Minutes from July 8th are approved. Moving on tonight, we have a couple public hearings. First one is Parks rezoning. This is a request to zoning district change from rural public R1-13.5, R1-9.5, RM-6.5, RM-2.5, iGen, office and community commercial to park and open space zoning district. I believe, Julie, you will make sense of that for us.
Mr. Chair, I'll do my best.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to share, not only with the commission, but with the members of the audience. So if we could have the audio, or the visual. We've got the audio. So just to review the purpose and the timeline of the parks rezoning, some of you who were around in 2009 when the 2030 comp plan was adopted might recall that that comprehensive plan provided for a land use designation identified as parks and open space. Now, as you all know as planning commissioners, that zoning must be in conformance with the comprehensive plan. So one of the implementation strategies coming out of the approval of the 2030 comp plan was to zone those properties that are parks and open space as parks and open space. That was a bigger task than just a simple rezoning because the city at that time did not have a parks zoning district. So those of you who are on the commission within the last 18 months will recall that we came forward as staff proposing a new zoning district called Parks and Open Space, and that was adopted in 2017. So now the second, or actually third step of this overall process is to now rezone city-owned properties to parks and open space. Right now, those properties are zoned a variety of different zoning districts that Commissioner Piper read off in the introduction, everything from rural and single-family residential to commercial and industrial. And the purpose of creating the parks zoning district is to provide consistency and uniformity among all of the parks and the regulations that apply to those properties. So the parks rezoning, as I said, provides for more appropriate and consistent regulations between what actually is occurring on that park property. For instance, take an example, if a park property right now is zoned office, it would allow for permitted uses that allow office buildings and all of the regulations that go along with that, and does not speak to parks purposes. So the effort to rezone it to parks will identify those permitted uses that are more consistent with what is actually occurring on the property today. This rezoning does not propose any physical changes to the parks or open spaces or any of the property boundaries. I want to reiterate that the rezoning request is only for city-owned properties. So there is no proposed rezoning of privately owned property, only those that are owned by the city. So that zoning change does not affect any of the adjacent property. It is limited to the confines of the city-owned properties. It also does not impact the valuation of adjacent private properties. As you know, value of property is based on existing use. So we already have an existing use of a park in existence, so merely changing the zoning does not impact the valuation. And the permitted uses within the parks zoning districts restrict those uses to park and open space. So as you'll recall from when the commission reviewed the parks zoning district, the permitted uses within that district are active recreation, passive recreation, ball fields, historic properties, things of that nature that you already see out in those city-owned parks and open spaces. So this is primarily viewed as a housekeeping change in order to implement the 2009 adopted comprehensive plan to establish parks zoning on those properties that are city-owned park properties and ensure that those areas would remain as park and open space rather than have those contradictory regulations that are in existence now. So just to review some of the public outreach and review process, because of the extent and the vast locations of properties within the city that are actively used as park and open space, notices were sent out to property owners within 500 feet of any of the park and open space properties proposed for rezoning. So roughly about 9,200 residents received notice of a public or an informational meeting that was held early in June at the Senior Center. After those invitations went out, city staff fielded, I'm going to guess, approximately 50 phone calls in the days leading up to that informational meeting, and in addition, about 100 residents attended that meeting. And it was an opportunity for staff to explain what is proposed as part of the rezoning, and also to field any questions that came in from those residents. Now, going back a few slides, or one slide actually, this bullet list was largely created in reaction to some of the themes of questions that were identified by the residents at that informational meeting. So in an effort to kind of help involve the Planning Commission and clue them into what were the topics of conversation at that meeting. This evening is the formal public hearing process as part of the rezoning. So those same 9,200 residents received a notice of this evening's meeting. We learned a little bit based on the questions and comments that were provided at the informational meeting. So between the informational meeting and the public hearing, we revamped the notice that went out to those 9,200 residents in order to make it more understandable or try and proactively answer some of the questions that they had. So I'm sure some of the commissioners were also on that list and received those notices, so you would know from your own example how that was tweaked in order to try and address those concerns. We also, in that notice, included a public hearing at the City Council, which would be scheduled for August 13th. We did that in order to provide adequate notice to the residents, but also to help with the notification process, because it was such a massive undertaking to notify that number of residents as well. So the public hearing is scheduled for City Council on August 13th, pending a recommendation by the Planning Commission. And in these next slides, I'm just going to kind of go over the information that was shared on the city's website. So the notices that went to the residents included a link to the city's website to direct them to this information to hopefully help them understand or formulate what questions they might have. So this first map is a citywide map that identifies all of the park and open spaces in light green that are proposed for the rezoning. So that was what initially went out to the residents. Based on the feedback that we received at the informational meeting, we tried to improve upon that, and what we came up with was this map that identifies by number each of the proposed areas that are proposed for rezoning, and on the side you'll see a park name that corresponds with the appropriate number in order to help residents identify which park in proximity to them is proposed for rezoning. In addition, we identified by color the current zoning of the appropriate park. So take, for instance, park number 34 here. 34 is, if I can read, Purgatory Creek Park. Right now, looking at that color, you can see that that property is currently zoned rural, and all of the rural regulations would apply for permitted uses, setbacks, building height, those types of things. with the proposed rezoning, all of these properties would be rezoned to parks and open space and have consistent regulations among all of the properties. One of the other questions that came out of the informational meeting was residents wanting to understand what are the setback requirements that apply to the park property near me now, and what will they be in the future, so if the rezoning is approved. So this map helps residents identify what the current zoning is, and then they can go to these following tables to understand, based on the current zoning, for instance, an R195 has a front yard setback of 30 feet. And then they can scroll down to the new proposed parks and open space, and they can see that the front yard setback would then become 35 feet if that particular, is of particular concern for them, in an effort to get as much information in one location for residents to find quickly as possible for them and answer their questions. So I'm open to any questions that you may have, but that in a nutshell is this long-term project that we have been working on over the past several months.
Great, thank you. Sure. Questions from the commission?
I just have a question. Will we notice as members of the community, when we look at a park, is there anything that we're going to notice physically about the park? Are parks going to change in any way?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the answer to that is no. The only thing that is proposed for a change is the zoning district designation. You'll only see that on a map. Any programmatic, excuse me, I stumbled over that word, programmatic, activities in the park will still be handled the same way that they are today through Park and Rec staff, and any proposed improvements would be a separate process that would go through the same process it currently does.
And would you consider this change to make it more likely that parks stay as they are now? It would improve the chances that the parks will be parks in perpetuity.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Weber, I would say yes, that is an accurate statement because it does provide for parks as a permitted use, and it does not allow for some of the other uses that are currently listed in the office or industrial or commercial districts.
All right, thank you.
Other questions for Julie? Seeing none? Okay. This is a public hearing. Anyone is allowed to come forward and speak for or against this zoning proposal. Just by a show of hands, would you mind just raising your hand if you're interested in coming forward to speak? Just wondering, just one? Okay. Please come forward. Good evening. If you could state your name and spell for the record, and if you would just make comment related to this proposal, I'd appreciate it.
My name is Tom Oakes, O-A-K-E-S. I was at the June meeting, and a question came up regarding new development. And the issue was, what kind of development would the city allow in the vicinity of the parks and open spaces? Not in them, but what would the city allow? One woman there, I think, was concerned as a 6-story condo is going to be allowed in that area to affect, I guess, the aesthetics of the park and open space land. Another question that I had was, as the population of the city increases, are we going to acquire more park and open space land to accommodate a growing population? So,
great.
That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. We'll get you some answers to your questions. Julie, would you like to field those?
Mr. Chair, I will field the first question with regard to land use, and then I'll defer the second question on additional park and open space to Matt Bourne, the Park and Rec, or Park and Natural Resources Manager. So with regard to the first question about development proposed in the vicinity of the parks, any property that is privately owned and outside of the city parks would be governed by the comprehensive land use plan and the development review process that you as planning commissioners all are very familiar with. So the proposed parks rezoning does not impact the adjacent property. Those adjacent properties are guided by whatever land use designation they have on them currently and are not proposed to change as a part of this process.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, to answer the second question, with Cedar Hills Park, that was actually our last plan active use park. Any development and stuff, we're always looking at if there's opportunity for extra conservation area lands, that type of stuff, but there is no plans for additional active use parks.
Yes, sir, would you like to come forward? Please say your name and spell it for the record, if you would.
My name is Epan Chaco, Chacko, and my family and I live at 6722 Boyd Avenue, and that we back onto what's called the Eden Brook Conservation Area, and so I think that's 11 in that map. So I guess my question is a question of clarification. So when we bought our house, living abutting this conservation area was a big a draw for us. And so my question is, we're now talking about parks. Did this term conservation area have any particular meaning? Because it seemed to me that it's a place where really nothing can be done. You know, so for example, if a tree falls in the conservation area, it sort of stays there because that's the natural progress of things. But if it goes to a park, what did that conservation area term mean before? Does it go away? And if you have a term called a park, parks have slides and basketball courts and all kinds of improvements. The way I understand it, those things couldn't happen in a conservation area, but they could happen in a park. And maybe it's the fact that I don't understand the term because it doesn't appear to be a zoning term. But it seems to be a term that we all use. So my question is to really clarify that.
Okay. We'll try to get an answer for you. Thank you, Mr. Checo. Matt or Julie?
I'll take a first stab and then Matt can chime in if needed. So the proposed parks rezoning is the technical term of the zoning district that was adopted is parks and open space. So that's a parks and open space zoning district. Within that zoning district, it lists all of the permitted uses, which include active parks. Conservation areas are a permitted use. So I would not expect that there's any change to the existing conservation areas. So whatever is allowed to occur in those areas now is what would be allowed to occur in them in the future. Whatever restrictions are in place with regard to tree removal or things of that nature would remain the same. So no proposed changes in how those properties are being used would be influenced by this zoning change because a conservation area is a permitted use within the Parks and Open Space zoning district.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Any other comments or questions from the public? Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing, then we can have more discussion if we'd like.
Mr. Chairman, move to close the public hearing.
I have a motion by Commissioner Kirk, second by
Second.
Commissioner Weber. All those in favor of closing public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public hearing is closed. Further discussion related to this proposal from the commission.
I've been through this from the beginning, and I think it's a good and positive step for the city to further define and in some ways protect the land that we all value in Eden Prairie that we call parks and open spaces. So I think I'm among others as a very strong supporter of this.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments? Great. It does seem like we're just calling a park in the books, right? It's just so. Okay. All right. No other comments or discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move to recommend approval of the zoning district change from rural public R1-13.5, R1-9.5, RM-6.5, RM-2.5, IGen, office, and community commercial to Parks and Open Space Zoning District based on the staff report dated July 15th, 2019.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Commissioner Kirk and a second from Commissioner Weber. All those in favor saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you, Julie, for explaining that to us. Moving on this evening, we have another public hearing this evening. It is variance number 2019-03, location 12900, 13000, 13250, and 13300 Technology Drive. This is a request to permit 2 freestanding signs with the following variances. 1, sign sizes greater than 80 and 36 square feet. 2, sign bases greater than 40 square feet. 3, 1 sign with a height greater than 20 feet. Would the proponent of the project please step forward? Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, I imagine you'll tell us about your project here.
Excuse me?
You'll tell us about your variance request.
Yes, I have a brief
All
PowerPoint that I'd like to go through.
Great. Would you state your name and spell it for record for us?
Sure. Laren Holcomb, Holcomb.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb.
So, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, thank you first for your time this evening. I'm here tonight to talk about our variance request. First off, again, Laren Holcomb. I'm a project manager for Timberland Partners. We are the developer of Elevate at Southwest Station. I'm here representing a few parties tonight, Southwest Station Association. This association includes 12900 Technology Drive, which is the location of Elevate at Southwest Station Apartments. Elevate's a mixed-use development with retail at the base and 222 apartments above. I'm also representing 13,000 Technology Drive. Owner of that is Mr. Scott Cooper. And then finally 13250 to 13300 Technology Drive. That property is owned by a gentleman by the name of Tom Cloutier. So a little background on why we're here tonight, why I'm here tonight. The Southwest Station sign that sat on the corner of Technology Drive and Prairie Center Drive was removed as part of the LRT construction. That removal happened a few months ago. A picture on the left shows the sign prior to removal, and then on the right showing after the sign was removed. So that sign went away. There is currently a sign, it's the former Santorini sign, that's on the site as well. The plans are that this sign will be removed as well, pending the approval of the 2 signs that we're here to talk about this evening. The reason for that is that sign is it no longer really fits the aesthetics of the area, for one. For two, it's not properly located for good visibility off of Prairie Center Drive or Technology Drive. So the first sign I'm going to talk about tonight is the Elevated Southwest Station retail sign. This sign has a height of 13 feet 3 inches, a width of 17 feet 2 inches. Each tenant placard on this sign will be 2 feet 4 inches tall and 6 feet wide. It's a freestanding sign. It'll be attached to the building on the second level plaza area, which we'll go through here on another slide. Its location is off eastbound 212 exit and Prairie Center Drive. This sign, the intention is to advertise the 6 Elevate at Southwest Station retail tenants only. There are 6 in our building, or will be 6 in our building. So this sign will just advertise for those tenants in our building. The size of this sign is 173 square feet. The base is 53 square feet, which exceeds the 40 square feet. So again, the variance request here is the sign size and then the size of the base. This is a rendering of the sign. As I just mentioned, it's mounted to the building on the second level plaza. That's Elevate in the background. It will be tall enough, the base will be tall enough so that it sticks above the parapet wall of this flat roof on the second level. And will be visible from Prairie Center and off of the exit of 212. This is a site plan of Elevate. I think if you can see my mouse moving here, it's this blue circle here is the location of that Elevate at Southwest Station sign. This is a footprint of the Elevate at Southwest Station apartments. This represents the LRT tracks coming through this location. As I mentioned, this will be on the second level plaza area. where the train tracks come up over the top of Technology Drive. There'll be a bridge here in this corner location, and then the train tracks will drop down and be pretty much at grade level here in this location, so our sign will be above that level of the train. Next sign is actually the Southwest Station Association retail sign. This sign has a height of 23 feet 9 inches tall. Its width is 18 feet 2 inches. And again, each tenant placard on this sign will be 2 feet 4 inches tall and 6 feet wide. This is, again, a freestanding sign located off the corner of Prairie Center Drive and Technology Drive. The intention of this sign is to advertise for all 16 retail tenants within our association, comprising of the 2 other owners that I mentioned earlier. This sign square footage totals 366.5 square feet with a 54 square foot base. So our request for variance on this, again, is the size of the sign, the size of the base, which is over the 40 square feet. In this sign's case, it's 23 feet 9 inches tall, which is 20 feet tall is what's allowable. And then the sign setback, this sign will be located in the right-of-way, which is where the old Southwest Station sign was that was removed. So it's in a similar location to that, and I'll show you a slide of the location here in a moment. So here are a couple renderings of this sign in the location we're proposing. As you can see, on the left, the sign itself, it's next to a walkway that goes out to a public plaza, which we will be building upon completion of the LRT construction. The slide on the right, again, is a shot from Technology Drive, looking at the sign with Elevate apartments in the background. On the right here, you can see more of that public plaza that's intended, or that's going to go below that bridge pier for the LRT train. And so it's kind of a nice visual here of showing the sign in the location that we propose. This rendering is stepping back a bit onto Prairie Center Drive, looking up Technology Drive. As you'll see, the Southwest Station sign is below the bridge there for visibility. It also shows you the size of the sign in relation to the 6-story elevated Southwest Station building on the right, just to give you kind of an idea of the size based on the building. Again, kind of the same site plan that we looked at earlier. In this case, the Southwest Station Association sign is here on the corner, again, of Prairie Center and Technology in this green circle, just off the public plaza, which is shown right here. That's the bridge pier for the LRT train. This is just a little closer representation of the sign. The sign sits, if you can see my mouse, right here. That 18 feet 2 inches represents the width of the sign here. Again, the public plaza here and the bridge pier here for the train. This site is tricky. It's a very tight site to find a good location for a sign. Not to mention the utilities off the corner of this in this location. There are many utilities. They're marked by some of these colored lines here, the red line, electric, and other lines located here. So we had a difficult time trying to locate this sign in a proper area to avoid all the utilities and still provide good visibility off of Prairie Center and Technology Drive. I think we've done that in this location. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and would love to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. I had a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Santorini sign. Do you know how tall that was, and then how wide it was at the top?
The width, so the sizes of the tenant sign is like 1'6", but I believe the Santorini sign, and I'm guessing here, is right at 20 feet.
Okay, thank you. All right. Questions from the commission?
Mr. Holcomb, I have a question about the strength of the sign. What wind speed will it be engineered to? What straight line wind will it tolerate?
So, in truth be told, I can't answer that question. I know that we've had the sign engineered by the signage company. I know that the sign will be aluminum construction, aluminum box construction, internally lit sign. It will also go on helical piers in that location. The soils in that location are tricky, and so we've decided to engineer it on helical piers to make sure that it doesn't move up and down. But I can't directly answer your question. I apologize, but I do know that the engineer for the signage company has done those calculations.
Julie, would you like to respond to that?
Mr. Chair, if I can expand on that question posed by Commissioner DeSanctis. I know that in initial conversations with city staff on the proposed sign, city staff has directed the applicant's engineer to work with the city's building official in order to make sure that things like wind speed and strength of the sign are addressed. So I know that there have been conversations between the building official and the folks working on the sign on behalf of the applicant in order to make sure that those items are addressed in to the satisfaction of the city through that process. I as well can't answer the specific numerical question, but I do know that those conversations are ongoing and have been occurring.
Other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner.
a few questions. First of all, on your enlarged plan of the corner, do you know where the stoplight traffic signal sits in relationship to this proposed monument sign?
This rendering here, is this the one you're...
That could be a good visual of it, but you had a plan view, an enlarged plan. Thanks,
That
that's
one?
it. Yep. I didn't see a notation on my graphic, maybe it's on yours, showing where the existing stoplight is.
So, and in relation to now the bridge construction here, the stoplight for, this is Prairie Center here, this is technology, would be in this location here.
Right, so the stoplight itself would be sitting in that circular plaza area somewhere off the curb? I'm wondering if you could estimate the distance. If you don't know where it is, I guess that's fine.
You know, I do not.
Okay, there's a requirement on our zoning code to be 50 feet back from traffic signals and things like that. So I wondered if you were strategically back 50 feet, or I can ask city staff if you don't know, but if that plan doesn't show it, I didn't know if you had a comment to that.
I don't, I'm sorry.
All right, can you tell me how you got the tenant sign size of 2'4" by 6 feet?
So we relied on our sign company based on traffic speed and location of the signs. Also based on the visibility of what's there on the Santorini sign at 1'6" on the tenant placards. So we really use their expertise to help us determine the height of those individual tenant placards.
Okay, all right. It seems like some vendors may have 2 lines of text, potentially. Probably not 3, but
Correct.
That's okay.
The other thing I'll mention is to keep the sign clean and looking where we're not going to brand each individual tenant. For example, Our Taco is in that location. It won't be Our Taco's logo on the sign. It'll be all the logos will be off, and it'll just be clean. Our Taco, Cafe Zupas, those. So.
Okay, good. The reason why I was inquiring about the individual tenant sign size is because it seems to me like the viewing distance for both of the signs, the one on the north for the Elevate tenants as well as the ones on the south, is limited to about 50 to 100 feet maximum. And that might suggest a letter height, certainly 6 inches at the most, probably 4 inches only. And I was struggling to find out how 2 lines of text even would get that large or that long. And so I was hoping that that could be downsized potentially if you and your sign vendor agreed to that, but might be worth just taking another look at. Traffic speed is, of course, one of the influences on how quick you pass it.
Correct.
I non-scientifically asked a couple people to read all the sign names on your exhibit, and it took them between 15 and 20 seconds. And this is a very busy corner, and so as people approach the turn movement and they pass the stoplight, this is probably one of the worst times for people to pause looking for their destination, wondering if they're on the sign or not. And so I have a concern about the quantity of signs because of that duration that it takes someone to scan down 2 rows of text immediately upon turning a corner in one of the busiest intersections in town. I love the design of the sign, by the way, but there's that element of too much messaging at a critical point in the turning movement that concerns me. So I'll ask staff about that. If you want to comment on that, I'll give you the opportunity to.
So, it's a good question, thank you. What we were trying to do with the sign is get every one of our tenants an opportunity to be represented on the sign. Their success bodes well to our success, obviously.
Absolutely.
So, the other thing that I'll note, it's not directly answering your question, but the signs are not going to be charged to the tenants. The owners of the properties are bearing the cost of the signs, bearing the cost of the sign. We're not charging back the tenants for their names to be put on the sign. So, but it's a good point on the traffic flow and the busyness of that intersection.
Okay, and my last question has to do with the total signage package. We're being asked tonight to just vote on these 2 signs. Could you recap for us the signs that you received earlier approval for, specifically the projecting signs on your building, and will there be any other wall signs specifically for the retailers above their storefronts as an example, or any other signs on the Elevate building per se?
Sure, I can speak to that. There are 2 additional blade signs on the elevated Southwest Station building. They're actually, I think, were just installed today. One being, and I'm just going to go back here, kind of off the, you can see in this rendering right here is an Elevate blade sign, and then there's another one right around the corner. So those 2 were already approved signs. And then there's one additional sign at the entrance to the Elevate at Southwest Station that says Elevate Apartments, and it's on the awning that sits out front of our rental office to draw traffic to our rental office. And then as far as the retail signage for each individual tenant, yes, they will go through that process, apply for that permit when they come in for approval of that. So each tenant will have a sign at the front of their space at Elevate. So.
Okay, and further, any off-site, are you working with the Southwest Station Transit people for the parking ramp signage? I see they don't have specific frontage on Technology Drive, yet they have signs on the face of their parking ramp. Are you proposing to supplement their signage at the intersection where the stoplight is entering your site, where all those banners are? There's not a monument sign there now.
Correct, and no, we are not planning on putting another sign on that entrance into the Southwest Station.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, there won't be any freestanding sign at that
Correct.
intersection.
Correct.
Where people might want to know where to turn.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Mr. Chair, I turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Julie, would you like to expand on the question about the street light location? Or stoplight location?
Mr. Chair, I'll actually defer that to Mr. Rue.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, if you can pull up that drawing again. So the signal is right in front of the bridge. So on the drawing there, it's the very long, slender triangle that a little bit further to the upper left, upper right, I'm sorry, upper right. Yeah, oh, you just passed it. It's a darker gray, and it's right in front of it's basically in front of the parapet wall of the bridge. You'll also notice, if you look on the handout, I think it's Exhibit F. It shows, it's got an arrow that shows the pedestrian push button poles. So those are lower poles that'll be under the bridge, but the mast arm itself is in front of the bridge.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if we could have the document camera, please.
Thank you, Sam. Stop, it's back here.
Sorry.
Can we pull up the document camera?
Yeah, it's right there.
Thank you. And if we could just zoom in on this area, please.
You had your chance.
Good luck.
I'm seeing it over here, but I'm seeing it on that screen, but not up on the wall.
There
There
we
we
go.
go.
There we go.
Thank you, Rod, if you could go through it again, I'll try and find it here.
Yep, so if you can see where that plaza is, on the very edge of that plaza, between the bridge pier, see that circle, that's the ped, but that's a pedestrian ped button. That's a handhole. Go a little bit further, right there. That's the pole, and then as you go right under your pen, that I should have gone over there.
Right here.
See the gray triangle that goes from that circle you pointed? You're right.
Or is it that? All right,
I'll come over.
I should cover it up with my pen. Marked. Some kind of a triangle. I don't know what it's talking about.
So this is the pole, the traffic pole, signal pole, and that's the mast arm coming out this way. And then there's another center median pole right here.
Oh, that one. Oh, over the street.
So like I said, here's the edge of the bridge. The bridge is right there. The bridge deck goes from there to there, and it's right in front of the bridge deck on the parapet.
Great. Mr. Chairman, can I
Mr. Fark.
follow up? Sorry, Rod, as long as you're there, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know. So the technical phrasing on our zoning ordinance is a permit for a sign to be located within 50 feet of any street, blah, 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 traffic sign or signal will be issued only if, ... The sign won't interfere with the ability of drivers and pedestrians to see any street sign, traffic sign, or signal, and the sign will not distract drivers, nor offer any confusion to any street or highway sign or traffic signal, ... In your opinion, is the proximity of the stoplight signal to the new sign within 50 feet? And if so or not, do you consider the sign location to be a potential distraction to the traffic signaling, given its messaging?
It looks like the sign is at least 60 feet, maybe a little more, away from the signal pole. As for the distraction, it is. I mean, I agree. There's a lot of messaging on that sign. There's a lot of activity. I mean, with that plaza, there'll be a lot of activity there as well. There's just going to be a lot of attention-grabbing issues as the traffic and the pedestrians blend there. So,
Thank you.
Great. Other questions from the commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Minnie.
Just a few thoughts and opinions that I have. I agree with some of this concern that Commissioner Farr is mentioning of, you have so many signs and reading them all. But at the same time, imagine that they weren't consolidating these and each one of, we had 2 different or 3 different monument signs going on. So you're reading this one, and that one. That could be just as distracting or more distracting. So in a sense, I do see how consolidating everything into one is probably the best, better than the alternative of multiple signs. Given the existing condition of that pylon, an attractive pylon sign, and then adding, let's say that stayed there and now we're adding another one. I think this probably is for the better. A thought that I have, I'd like that the sign is all of this tenant signages are just the black and white. But my thought on the logo versus similar text, sometimes, we can recognize a logo without actually reading it. So if each tenant actually were allowed their logo, you wouldn't necessarily have to sit there and read the text. You can see Chipotle, Noodles and Company, Caribou from afar without really reading it. So in a sense, I would think that might actually be something you could consider. Keeping everything black and white, not having everybody's colors and whatnot, but the text, allowing the text itself to be in the logo, that might actually be easier to see as you're driving by and you're just out of the corner of your eye, and there's the Starbucks or whatever it might be. The Elevate sign, I just have a slight concern there with regard to the color. It's a gray and white versus the other sign, which is black and white. It seems like there might not be enough contrast, that during the daytime it might be harder to read. Nighttime, I assume it's lit, and then the gray would be completely dark and easy to read. But in the daytime, that gray seemed like a light gray, and a light gray and a white might be difficult to see. So I thought maybe that could be the same black or just a darker gray. That was just a comment I had on that. I have a question on this Elevate sign that we're showing right now. When the light rail is built in, is this essentially at grade? How does this relate to, let's say, where the height of the tracks or whatever might be in front of this?
So, very good question, thank you. It will be above the grade of the tracks because this is located on the 2nd level plaza roof in this location of the Elevate building. And in relation to the tracks go up over the top of Technology Drive, and then they die down back to grade level as it goes around the building into the station. So this sign will be above that.
And then that wall below that Elevate sign that goes really all along Prairie Center Drive, let's take the Our Taco building. Our Taco and the tenants there have a sign on the street face, which is really the back of the building, and then they have a sign at the front of the building. I guess the question is, are any of the retail tenants for Elevate going to be allowed a sign on Prairie Center Drive side, which then I would feel would be duplicate to have that on top of this monument sign. So I don't know if that's something that you can for sure answer yes or no.
So, no, they will not have a sign on the Prairie Center Drive side.
Okay. Then the other thought, I guess, is just something to keep in mind with this many tenants, even with just the 6 tenants at Elevate, it's bound to happen that there's going to be a different number of tenants down the road. There might be more, in which case there'll be a tenant without a sign, but it's likely there's less if, the MRI place all of a sudden becomes, splits off into a small coffee shop and a H&R Block or something like that down the road. So I know these cabinets, the sign cabinet itself could be reconstructed to completely change the number of slots in there, but it's just something to keep in mind as for all of us, that there might be 5 tenants in Elevate, there might be 7 tenants one day in Elevate, and then again for the rest of the complex there. So, this sign is needs or some flexibility down the road, which I think the current design does allow for, the way it has kind of separate cabinet pieces. You could take that cabinet and kind of face it without affecting the rest of the sign design. So I'm not overly concerned, but something just that I thought I would mention. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Mendy.
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Baloo.
I have two questions on the Southwest Station signage. I kind of agree with Commissioner Farr saying that due to the traffic, it's a potential distraction. That's one thing. And I think even if you put the logos, if all those things are filled out, it's going to take some time for people to, especially for the new people coming in. That could be an issue. The other question I have is, can you address the setbacks? So by chance, if this thing falls near it, the pedestrians walking nearby, will they get? Is there the safety concern? Is it a safety concern for you?
I think with the proper engineering, no. Certainly that's why we're looking at doing helical piers in this area to make sure that sign doesn't go anywhere. Doing our proper engineering on, as was talked about earlier, the wind loads. Again, the location of the site, the density of the site in the area, we did look at a lot of other possibilities, locations that frankly just didn't work as well. And this appeared to be, in our minds anyway, the best location for the sign, for visibility and overall appeal of the area.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Ayer. Any other comments before we go to the public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, can I just add one other minor comment? And that is in the middle of your signs where you have the vertical text, Southwest Station, and then Elevate. On your graphics, both of them have been reversed in direction from renderings that I've seen in other places. Your projecting signs, your banners that got approved as part of the PUD read Elevate from the top down. Now it reads from the bottom up, and I like that better. And whereas the Southwest Station, you have that one drawn from the top down, but out there in the field, all of the Southwest Station vertical text reads from the bottom up.
Oops.
So in an effort to be consistent, I think you ought to strive to maybe make them all read from the bottom up as opposed to top down, and coordinate that amongst the projecting sign and the ground signs.
Very good comment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, I'll correct myself. I don't know if, Julie, if you've given a planner's report on this?
Mr. Chair, I certainly can whenever you're ready.
I think so.
Okay. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Mr. Holcomb has, I believe, done a thorough job in going through the specifics of the request, so I'll try and hit the high points from a planning staff perspective, if you will. So the variance requests before you this evening are essentially three individual requests. One is for sign size, because the signs exceed the 80 square feet or 36 square feet allowed for freestanding signs in this area. In addition, the sign base is a variance request because, of course, the sign base is directly tied to the sign size as a percentage. So naturally, if you are proposing to increase the sign size, the sign base will also adequately or appropriately increase as needed. And then the third request is for the sign height for the Southwest Station sign. As you know, the request is to exceed the 20 square feet to 23.9 square feet on that potential sign location. So as was reviewed in the other comments, the city code does allow, in the cases of PUD, for off-site signage. As commissioners, you're well aware that off-site signage is not allowed elsewhere in the city. So for instance, a McDonald's or a Starbucks is not allowed to have a sign at the end of the block if they don't own that property. Their signage is required to be on their site. But because all three of these parcels are part of the original Southwest Station PUD that was approved in, I believe, 2002, there is an opportunity to do off-site signage, meaning that the folks in Southwest Station or shops at Southwest Station where the Chipotle or the MRI or the Caribou are located, they are allowed to have an off-site sign in order to consolidate signage as part of a PUD process. So if the variance was not requested in order to address the sign size and base and height location or height of the proposed sign, and the applicant came forward with requests that did comply with city code, likely you'd end up seeing 4 individual signs in this very busy corner already that will house not only the commercial and residential, but all of the utilities and the bridge piers for the LRT and the plaza area as a part of the overall project. So the applicant is proposing to consolidate all of those signs and is seeking the waiver in order to match, if you will, the massing and the size of the development that is proposed at that corner. So as you know, the variance request must meet the 3-part test, and staff is recommending approval of the variance request as outlined in your staff report, in that it does meet, from staff's perspective, the 3-part test that is identified. I would like to point out that Exhibit H in your staff report, which is also the visual that Mr. Holcomb shared, zoomed in on that area, does indicate the proposed location of the sign, which is with the Southwest Station sign, which is within the right-of-way. So a setback is not necessarily applicable when it's within the right-of-way, because setbacks are typically measured from the property line. And in this case, the sign is proposed in the right-of-way. A condition of approval of the variance would include modifying the encroachment agreement with the city in order to address the signage. There is already an encroachment agreement in place to address the plaza area that would be constructed as a part of the Elevate project. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from the commissioners for the city?
Julie, I have a question about illumination. It looks like they're going to be using a 6500 Kelvin LED system. What I'm wondering is does the city specify specific times at which the illumination must be ended for the day?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the city code does not regulate illumination time restrictions, if you will. The only illumination or restriction that is in place is with regard to dynamic signs, meaning those that have movement. So if it is a moving sign, it's not allowed to change any sooner than every 20 minutes, but that is not the type of sign that is proposed with this request.
One of the corollaries to my question is to what extent the residents will be in line of sight to the illuminated sign at that level of illumination and that Kelvin shade. Will that interfere in any way with people's light intrusions into the residence?
Mr. Holcomb, do you want to?
I can address that. Let me pull up the rendering here. So with the way that the sign is facing and the fact that the front is lit, not the back side, most of the residents living in Elevated Southwest Station will be looking at the back side of the sign. And so I don't personally feel that we'll have an illumination issue in the evenings.
Okay.
Other questions for Julie? Commissioner Reddy.
Just for clarification, Julie, let's say that these 3 properties each instead were doing their own freestanding sign. In that case, would each one of those be allowed a sign base of 40 feet, or is the 40 feet, which we're providing a variance for, is the 40 feet sign base maximum like a cumulative between the 3 properties?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Meddy, the 40-foot is tied to the 80-foot 80 square feet sign area that is allowed. So the sign base can be half of the sign area. So if, for instance, they installed an 80 square foot sign, they'd be allowed a 40 square foot base. For the 36 square foot sign, they'd be allowed half of that. So it is not a cumulative 40-foot base for all of the signs, but each of the signs would be allowed a 40-foot base if they're an 80 square foot sign.
So the 80 square feet, it would be allowed for each property if they were separate.
Commissioner Meddy, Chairman, they would each be allowed a 80 square foot sign, each parcel with a 40 square foot base. In addition, the Elevate parcel would also be allowed a 36 square foot sign because it has frontages on 2 public streets, Technology and Prairie Center. So that's why that parcel would get a second sign at allowable size of 36 square feet, and then the base half of that.
So they're allowed a cumulative 276 square feet, and
Correct.
we're at, can you remind me where the total is of these 2 signs?
The proposed request is, I believe, 530 square feet.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
That's right. Julie, can the utility company say no to the D&U easement encroachment?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, since this sign is in the right-of-way, there would be a permit, and most of the utilities are already in place. So as the proponent indicated, they placed the sign where there were no utilities, so tried to avoid that conflict. All the utilities that are in there are currently shown. I would assume there's no further utilities going in there, but maybe the proponent can verify that. But
I just wondered about the future risk, since there was a staff report comment about how you had to ask the utility companies that were around there.
you would have to, if there were changes or additions in that area, you'd have to either avoid the utilities, or they would have to be relocated at someone's expense, more than likely the proponent expense.
Okay, great, thank you. And Julie, there's 2 driveways into this southwest station area. The one we've been talking about a little bit is furthest to the east on Technology. There's a secondary one between the old Culvers and that shopping center. Nothing's been said about any signage at that particular corner, and we haven't seen the application yet for the new Southwest Transit parking ramp. So there doesn't seem to be any need or call for signage there, and that sign would be on this group of properties that they're talking about now. So how confident are we that they may have to come back in the future after we see the PUD application or whatever application it's going to be for the Southwest Transit ramp, that they're going to be wanting to ask them for signage rights at that intersection pulling into the park and ride?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, to answer Commissioner Farr's question, it gets somewhat complicated, so I appreciate if you'll bear with me through the explanation. So the city does not anticipate a PUD application to address the LRT improvements on site. As you know, that went through a separate municipal consent process. As a courtesy, Southwest Transit Project Office, Met Council, brought forward for the commission's review, I'm going to guess a year and a half, 2 years ago, plans for the proposed parking ramp, including construction materials, renderings of what that would look like, in order to get feedback from the Planning Commission. That Planning Commission comments then were forwarded to the City Council, and a similar process was gone through with the City Council. But because it is a regional organization, I do not expect that there is a formal PUD application that would be coming through the process as a part of the LRT parking ramp that that is proposed at this site. With regard to signage, the project office has not provided a final rendering, if you will, of what the proposed signage will be. I know that Southwest Transit and the Met Council have been talking about co-locating signage for Southwest Transit and the Green Line extension, but I don't believe that they have reached any conclusion as to what that would look like at this point. It's likely to be forthcoming in the future as we get closer to the actual construction and opening of this multimodal transit facility.
Okay.
I think that answers all your questions, but if I've missed some, please let me know.
No. So my takeaway is maybe not, but it could be. There could be a request in the future. We don't know yet.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we don't have enough information at this point to know exactly what signage would be proposed as part of the LRT project. This proposal in front of you this evening addresses only the residential and commercial development on these 3 lots.
Right. Okay.
If I could add my comment, listening to what Julie said, I would say likely there's going to be some signage at that far driveway, but that's fairly far removed from where we're at right now.
Right.
I'm thinking, yeah, the distant driveway.
Right.
And I would be surprised if there isn't something that comes up there. And hopefully we'll have a chance to review that.
I appreciate the distance. It just shows up on the map as their property.
Yeah.
The consolidated property.
I hear what you say there too.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just adding on, boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
If they do a sign on the west side of, like, let's say where the Culvers is now, on the west side of that driveway entrance, which is right here, is that outside of the PUD? I don't know if that what I'm looking at is the PUD boundaries or not, but is the Culvers part of the PUD area?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the former Culver site was a part of the original PUD.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, last question to staff. I didn't see anywhere in our sign ordinance that talked about a limit to the number of multi-tenant sign messages that could be accommodated on a area sign or monument sign. I don't know what the kind of worst-case scenario is in our city already. Certainly, our Eden Prairie Mall doesn't attempt to list all 100 retailers within the mall along Prairie Center Drive. I'm trying to think of another large shopping center that may attempt to do something like that. Prairie Village Mall at 4 and 5 can't fit all of their tenants on there. Maybe as a different topic for a different day, is there a thought process where maybe we think about the maximum number of tenant messages on a sign for the purpose of safety?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, to answer Commissioner Farr's question, this sign ordinance currently does not provide a specific number of tenant identification signs permitted per freestanding sign. Largely that's self-regulated based on the size requirements that are in place for signs. So the examples that Commissioner Farr shared, for instance, Eden Prairie Center or Prairie Village Mall or Preserve Mall, those, I believe, frankly, are a bit different than this particular project because this project is within the TOD area. So we're not only trying to provide identification for vehicular consumers, if you will, but also pedestrians, folks on the LRT train as well that maybe as they're coming into their stop are looking for what's at this station, where can I get a bite to eat, you know, where should I go once I get off of the train. So with regard to specific sign regulations and things that we might need to look for in the future, staff does expect that in the future there will be sign regulations that are brought forth specific to the TOD and town center zoning districts, because right now our signage code addresses commercial districts and residential districts in a more traditional manner. But because of the fact that TOD and town center are more of emerging development trends, staff is taking a, I'm going to say, slower approach to that in order to be responsive to the needs of the community, rather than being very prescriptive on the outset and not necessarily being able to address specific site conditions. So as these developments continue to evolve, we have the opportunity to review the proposals and cater those specifically to that site prior to jumping in, if you will, and providing very specific recommendations.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add to Julie's comments.
Yes, Commissioner Kirk.
I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I think a real positive one in the sense that we are kind of breaking some new boundaries here. And to add to what you said, Julie, there's also just the scope of the structures and the scope of what's around this sign. To me, that bridge that goes across Technology Drive is going to be a significant character change to that whole aspect, or that whole part of Eden Prairie. And frankly, I was pleasantly surprised to see this bigger sign, you know, really not look like a big sign to me in the renderings, in the scope of everything that's around it. And yet, we still need to have those safety concerns and those other discussions that are coming up here. And I'd also like to say one of the positive things I think about this proposal is the consolidation, because as Commissioner Meddy said, you know, there could be 4 signs virtually almost the same size as these in the area where now there's not. Understand there's some trade-offs and some negatives to that as well, but all in all, it's an interesting change in perspective for me thinking about signs, and secondly, I think we're learning a lot more about what are some of the considerations that we have to look at in the future, and that would be a good point for some discussions moving forward in the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Kirk. Any other comments before we go to the public hearing portion? Great. This is a public hearing. Would anyone like to come forward and speak for or against this project or make comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Commissioner Farr made a motion to close. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Kirk, second. All those in favor of closing public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing's closed. I was going to add, Commissioner Kirk, you make a good point. This kind of following what Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Meddy talked about. This having this rendering of the bridge go in there, it does really change that whole corner. And there's just going to be a lot going on. You're going to have people, pedestrians, people sitting on the patio. You're going to have a bridge suddenly rising up next to you, train going overhead. It's just, this is going to be a different byproduct of this.
It's going to be a different Eden Prairie right there.
Yeah, it is. So it's seeing this drawing and thinking of what you guys are discussing. It's going to be different. It's going to be a lot going on right there. So I think it's good to have a discussion at some point about signage and busyness and things like that. So. Yeah,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
okay, so blowing a lot of steam this evening. I don't want to take up much more time. I don't mind the consolidation. I think that's a good thing in terms of signage reduction, in terms of the number of times one has to pay attention away from driving. The element of sign size and messaging, to me, bears comparison to the TOD designation. We're striving towards a more pedestrian-oriented streetscape. And this is a 100% vehicular-oriented element, as opposed to pedestrian-oriented scaled signage. This is meant for the person in the automobile, not for the person holding the umbrella with the stroller walking by in a sidewalk who has to crank their neck up 32 feet to read the sign. Of course, this is for the car. and I acknowledge that. 8 to 5, all of my clients are asking me for the same thing, maximize signage area. These retailers really depend upon big signs, frequent signs. They've got to get their message out in front of the public to be successful. And the Elevate project is a little bit burdened, frankly, because their retailers are off the curb. And they may suffer because of that. And so I think this sign is very, very important for the retailers. If someone had told me this sign was coming down the pike without me seeing the application, I would have thought that I would have seen it right at the stoplight where you enter into the Southwest Station area, where the old Santorides was, by the Cafe Zuppa. So that would give enough time for the cars to turn the corner off of Prairie Center Drive. And then as you're approaching this big, tall sign in your car, you could then maybe spend some time reading down through those messages before deciding to turn right into this district. Whereas now it's kind of right there at the corner, trying to do a couple things. It's trying to engage that Prairie Center Drive traffic, which I don't think it does a very good job of. And then immediately when you turn the corner, it's right there in your face, and oop, that second is up, you're past it. Otherwise, the guy in back, he was honking his horn. So I'm not having a problem with the sign being consolidated, nor am I having a problem with being tall. I think there's a conversation to be had whether it should be pedestrian-oriented instead of vehicular-oriented, but I know the retailers just need it to be vehicular-oriented. I just wish it was 100 yards downstream, closer to the entrance to the stoplight, where I think it'll be more effective and more legible for their intended audience. I love the design of the sign, and I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. Other comments, discussion?
Having a second motion to
Would anyone like to make a motion? Commissioner Minnie.
I guess I don't want to drag this on for too long, but I think you make a lot of good points, although if I were doing this, I would put the sign where it is now. I think about when I used to drive to this area before Elevate went up at all, and it was just a parking lot. If you're coming over the highway, you could actually see all the storefronts. You could see Noodles and Company. You could probably even see Culver's. Maybe that was a little bit hidden because of the ramp. But now they're all completely blocked, and those retailers don't have the visibility that they used to. So I think that this will help them to still have it from Prairie Center Drive, since that's now been eliminated because of Elevate going up. So I think that while this is a very large sign, I think that this the LRT bridge is really going to just dwarf a lot of things. I don't know. It's so hard to imagine what it's going to be like. Maybe it won't be that big and massive, which, hopefully it doesn't, but it's kind of hard to see. So it's
I agree completely with you. I think one, I agree with Commissioner Farr. I think it's a great looking sign. And for it being large, I think with the scope of everything around it, it really needs to be, somewhat. The pedestrian auto discussion's a good one. I hadn't really thought of that. But I think it's a reasonable, compromise given the scope of everything that it's put around. So.
But I guess you made the comment about pedestrian. That's the direction we want to go, but right now it is more vehicles. And I would rather have the pedestrian having to crane their neck to look up than cars turning that corner and then slowing down and having cars right behind them. So I think I'd rather have it more focused on vehicle personally.
I'm all for the pedestrian, field, but at the end of the day, this area, and then I think anywhere in Eden Prairie, we don't have that small town Main Street spot. And this is a, 500 stall parking ramp here. Maybe it's more. People are driving here to then use alternate forms they drive here to go on a walk. They drive here to get on the train. They drive here to do all the things that they're going to do here. So unfortunately, I think that as much as we want the pedestrian scale to happen here, it's not. Right. I wish it were nice little Main Street shops, but we don't have that.
Right, right. Mr. Chair, would I be out of order to ask the applicant if he had considered a signage location further west?
Commissioner Farr.
You've been hearing our conversation. Have you evaluated the opportunity for this same sign just to get moved, I don't know if it's 100 yards or what have you, further west towards that stoplight intersection where you enter your district?
Yeah, yes, we did look at a lot of different options along Technology Drive. One was essentially the exact location of the former Santorini sign, and then also a little closer to Technology Drive and a little further west on Technology Drive. Again, the area is dense and pretty tight in that location. If you go farther west on Technology Drive, closer to the entrance to our site, you've got the new retail building there, along with the deck space, and then there's a pathway along there, so there isn't really any location along there for the signage. And the location as far as where the current Santorini sign sits certainly wasn't very conducive for visibility, again, off of Prairie Center Drive as you turn onto Technology. So we did look at lots of locations even up farther on Prairie Center Drive to the north, but then the bridge gets in the way. The LRT bridge starts to kind of dive down as it goes over Technology Drive. So truthfully, we spent a lot of time trying to analyze and determine what would be best for our tenants, signage-wise, for visibility. So long answer is yes, we did look at lots of different options.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. That helps.
Commissioner Stinkis.
Yeah, I understand the expediency and appreciate the desire to expose the retailers to the general public. My concern is that continuing issue about the confluence of the pedestrian traffic and the vehicular. And my question now is for the city, is there any consideration to reducing the speed limit on Prairie Center Drive, which would perhaps give people more of an opportunity to decipher what's on the signs?
It's 40 miles an hour.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I don't think there would be much support for reducing the speed limit. I believe it's already, I think it might be 35
No, it's
now.
40.
It's 40.
Let's get to 35.
But I think the visibility of this sign is really for vehicles that are stopped at the intersection. I think the way the orientation of this sign is, it's pointing toward the intersection. I don't think you're going to get a lot of people driving by that would necessarily see it, just because of all the bridge piers that'll be there. You might get a slight glance at it, but.
My concern too about the configuration of the bridge pier with the plaza and elevate the building and shadows that may encroach upon the roadway and reduce motorists' ability to discern figures that are moving in the plaza area and across the street. There are going to be children, infants in strollers, older people, people who are visually handicapped, motorically handicapped, and I'm concerned about the density and the busyness of this intersection. It's laudable that we're trying to do this with the signage, but I'm wondering if consideration can be given to reducing the speed limit. I think it's high time that the motorists heed that, plus will save energy if they're driving at a lower speed.
Is there a specific concern you can identify, something that's happened that you are making that recommendation?
Well, I don't want to see a tragedy happen before we have this discussion.
Is there any comparable area that you've seen such a tragedy happen? I mean, I'm just wondering where it's coming from that we would.
Where it's coming from is a better balance between pedestrian mobility and vehicular traffic. That's what I'm talking about.
And how does that relate to the sign?
How does that relate to the sign? Well, first of all, if you lower the speed limit, perhaps there's a better chance for people to notice the sign and perhaps have a better opportunity to react if a child runs across the road or there's a pedestrian in the walkway. I think slowing the speeds on that road might create a little bit more of a safety barrier.
Isn't that true of any road?
I agree, but I think we've all agreed here this is a unique configuration of bridge pier, elevate, and also pedestrian traffic and retail.
Right, if I could just interject, it's an interesting discussion. I think it's maybe separate from the variance application. So maybe it's a discussion Julie could put on at a later time. But I think it is separate from the request before us, so I'd like to move on if we could. Commissioner Higgins, did you have a
I
comment?
think that's what I was going to suggest.
Okay. All right. Any other comments about the request in front of us?
Do we have the second motion to pass yet or not? Or did we already take care of that?
I think we've closed the public hearing. and
Yeah,
that's
but
where we
then
stand.
there was a second motion after it.
I don't think anyone's made a motion yet. So,
Well, I'd move to recommend approval of variance number 2019-03 based on information outlined in the Planning Department staff report dated 7/15/19 and finding and conditions of final order number 2019-03.
all right, I have a motion, Commissioner Weber. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Commissioner Higgins. All those in favor of approving the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, variance passes. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Thank you for entertaining our questions.
Thank you.
Good luck on your project.
Good job.
All right, moving on this evening. Julie, any planners reports?
No, sir.
Any members reports?
Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, rather, just to further that, it may be warranted for staff individually, or if they want planning commissioners further advice on this or not, just to review our signage code for other influences that signs have on our public way and our citizens. Cone of vision from a car, speed limits of drivers, number of messages per sign, and proximity to other visual attention-grabbing elements along the public way, which is pretty vague.
I think it is a good discussion because we are in uncharted territory a little bit with this particular area, and we talked a lot about the walking mile, that last mile, which is a lot bigger radius than this TOD. So I think it's definitely worth a conversation.
One of the other thoughts I had in listening to this discussion, which has really been helpful to me in particular, because I was just trying to grasp something, and it is that this particular place in the city is unique. It's going to, there are no other big places where all of these activities come together quite the way they do at Southwest Station. And we're going to have a huge new parking ramp as well. And, you know, in that further western entrance, that could be very important. I don't know enough about how that new ramp is going to function. But it's just realizing we were going to have a station, but we don't now, at Mitchell Road, means there's going to be so much more concentration from all over the city getting to that place. We'll probably have to take note of it in all the ways you've all been talking, which is really, you know, why we need to have the conversation you just pointed to.
And I'll just add a yet.
Yes,
This is
I
a
know,
unique
yeah.
place yet,
Yeah.
so far, because I think, you know,
It's
we'll
going to
be
change over
seeing
time.
something,
More of this.
more of this in the future.
Yeah.
All right, any other members' reports? Entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Commissioner Weber, motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Hearing's closed. Thank you for your comments, everyone.